You wake up, it's raining. You check your phone, glance at the radar, and decide whether to grab an umbrella or just wait it out. Now, strip all of that away. No radar, no umbrella, no phone. Just you, maybe a hole in a rock, and a sky that's about to dump water on everything you own. This is a problem every human on Earth had to solve for hundreds of thousands of years, long before anyone built a roof on purpose. And the answers people came up with stretch across the entire span of human history, from the first firekeepers to the people who eventually built actual houses with drainage systems built in. Let's start at the very beginning, because rain didn't just mean getting wet. It meant your fire. The single most valuable piece of technology your group had was suddenly under threat. Humans had controlled fire for an extremely long time before they figured out how to fully protect it. Some researchers point to evidence of controlled fire use stretching back over 1,000,000 years, with much stronger, widely accepted evidence from a few 100,000 years ago onward. Once a group depended on fire for warmth, cooking, and keeping predators away, a sudden downpour was a real emergency. Wet wood doesn't burn well. A flooded fire pit is a dead fire pit. So people built their hearths under rock overhangs, inside cave mouths, or under simple lean-to structures, specifically so a sudden storm couldn't snuff out the one thing keeping everyone warm and fed. Eventually, humans got even smarter about this. Archaeologists have found early fire containers, basically small clay pots built to hold a slow, smoldering ember using very little fuel. These let people carry a live coal from one camp to the next without having to start a brand new fire from scratch every single time, rain or no rain. Evidence for this kind of fire pot goes back roughly 10,000 years, found at a site near the southern tip of South America. Picture trying to start a fire with 2 sticks while standing in a drizzle. Now picture just opening a small clay pot with an ember already glowing inside. That's the difference this invention made. Now, back to shelter, because this is where the popular idea of the caveman gets a little misleading. Caves feel like the obvious go-to, and they were used, but probably not as constantly as movies make it look. A lot of researchers now think early humans built temporary shelters out in the open more often than we assume, using branches, hides, and whatever was on hand. Caves were just harder to come by, and not every group lived near one. But here's the thing, caves were genuinely excellent at blocking exactly this kind of weather. Solid rock stops wind. Solid rock stops rain completely. And rock doesn't rot the way wood and branches do, which is actually a huge part of why we find so much preserved evidence of ancient life, specifically inside caves. The open-air camps mostly decayed into nothing over thousands of years. The cave sites survived. And once people were inside a cave, they didn't just huddle there and let water drip on them from the ceiling. In a number of excavated caves, archaeologists found small holes pressed into the dirt floor in a deliberate pattern. Those holes once held wooden posts, the leftover skeleton of a simple roof or screen built specifically to block water leaking down from the rock above. So even with an entire mountain sitting over their heads, people were still engineering a second, smaller roof underneath it. That's not an accident. That's the same instinct you have when you put a tarp over your tent just in case. Rain didn't just threaten shelter and fire, though it also messed with the food supply. Hunting in heavy rain is rough. Visibility drops, animal tracks wash out, and a lot of game simply goes quiet and hides, the same way deer and birds do during a storm today. So, a lot of day-to-day hunting probably just paused when the weather turned bad. This is one of the reasons stored food mattered so much. Dried meat, dried fish, and preserved plant foods meant a group could ride out several wet days without anyone needing to go outside and chase dinner through the mud. At later sites like Skara, Brae, a Neolithic village in Scotland built around 5,000 years ago, archaeologists actually found meat and fish hung above the central hearth, smoked and dried specifically to last, through the kind of stretch where going outside wasn't really an option. Speaking of staying dry while you're outside, this is where clothing comes in, and it's more impressive than you'd expect. Long before synthetic fabric existed, humans were already working out the basic chemistry of waterproofing. Archaeologists have found small bone tools called lissoirs, dating back tens of thousands of years, with wear patterns that match one very specific job: rubbing and smoothing animal hide until it became tighter and more resistant to water. Think of it as the Ice Age version of waxing a jacket. No factory, No chemical lab, just bone, hide, and a huge amount of repetitive effort, probably done by firelight while waiting out a storm happening right outside the entrance. Then there's Ötzi, one of the most famous individuals in all of archaeology, a man who died in the Alps around 5,000 years ago and was preserved in ice well enough that we actually found his gear intact. Among his belongings was a woven mat made from alpine grass. For years, the popular story was that this was a cape, an actual prehistoric raincoat worn over his shoulders. More recent research has pushed back on that idea pretty hard. A number of archaeologists now think it was more likely part of a backpack or a mat for sitting or lying on, rather than something worn against the rain. Historians are genuinely split on this one, so it stays an open question instead of a settled fact. What is settled is this. Whatever its exact purpose, the technique behind it, weaving plant material into a tight, functional sheet, shows people were already thinking in terms of layers and barriers against bad weather. That's the exact same logic behind a poncho or a tarp today. By the time you get to settled farming communities, a few thousand years later, rain stopped being just a problem you reacted to and became something you designed around. Skara Brae is a great example. The walls were built from thick stone, and while we don't know for certain what the roofs were made of, since nothing organic survived 5,000 years, researchers think they were likely some combination of timber, whalebone, turf, and thatch, probably layered to shed water the same way modern thatched roofs still do in parts of the world. But the part that really shows how far the thinking had come is underneath the village. Archaeologists found an actual drainage system built into the settlement, channels designed specifically to move water away from the houses instead of letting it pool around them. That's not a lucky accident. That's people identifying a recurring problem and engineering a permanent fix for it. So here's the part that should stick with you. Ancient humans weren't just sitting around getting soaked and waiting for the sky to clear. They were watching the weather and reading the signs the same way a farmer glances at clouds today. They were protecting their fire under rock overhangs and eventually carrying embers in clay pots so a storm couldn't reset their entire week. They were ducking into caves and then improving on those caves with handmade roofs. They were drying and storing food so rain couldn't cancel dinner. They were treating animal hide with bone tools to push water away from their skin. And eventually, they were digging drainage channels under entire villages so water had somewhere else to go. None of that is luck. That's the same basic instinct you have when you check the weather app, grab a jacket, and figure out your plan B. Just running on a completely different set of tools, refined over hundreds of thousands of years. The umbrella is new. The problem it solves is ancient.